3 days ago, after the UK national death toll passed 100,000 deaths, Boris Johnson went live on his national nightly address to the nation and said, albeit with sorrow, that he had done everything he could to minimise the amount of death and suffering caused by the country. I thought we'd have a little conversation about all the slip-ups that Boris Johnson has made in the last 12 months that could, if he had chosen to act differently, could have reduced the death toll, and maybe we wouldn't be at 100,000 right now. We kick it off right away back in January when Boris Johnson decided to skip the first 5 Cobra meetings after witnessing how Wuhan were dealing with the coronavirus pandemic. They had gone into national lockdown, they had shown that it caused death, and they had shown that it had linked to people spreading this disease, this new disease, very rapidly, and the fact that it started to make its way over to Europe, Boris Johnson didn't care. He waited until the 6th Cobra meeting. Bear in mind he's the Prime Minister. He waited to the 6th Cobra meeting before he decided to rock up. At first, instead of assuming that we were going to go into a lockdown, Boris Johnson decided to say that it wasn't a big deal and that we just needed to wash our hands, and saying that people's grandparents were going to die. He decided, instead of trying to minimise the effect of this disease and trying to stop the spread across the UK, he decided instead to try and attempt herd immunity, and that's where the famous line of "people are gonna die" came from, and he just let that happen for a little bit. In March, he let sporting events go ahead despite cases rapidly rising. This included Cheltenham Festival, which here's a picture of what Cheltenham looked like at that time, as well as the Liverpool Champions League game against Atletico Madrid, which allowed thousands of fans from Spain to come and fly into the UK despite a national pandemic occurring. Despite constant claims up till April of everybody saying we are 2 weeks behind Italy, the UK in terms of numbers, in terms of cases, in terms of deaths, and the R number are 2 weeks behind Italy. Boris Johnson waited exactly 2 weeks. Italy declared their first lockdown on the 9th of March. Our lockdown got announced on the 23rd of March. He waited exactly 2 weeks in order to announce this lockdown, instead of getting ahead of looking at other countries, looking at Italy, being like, okay, we're ahead of them, let me minimise the damage and do a lockdown early so less people die. In the run-up to this lockdown, even before that, he was bragging about going to COVID wards and shaking hands with people who had coronavirus, and the lack of responsibility in the fact that he didn't even try and educate himself on the fact that that's a big way that COVID's going to spread, innit? Throughout the lockdown from March until June, he joined publicly on national television in the Clap for Carers campaign, and if you were unaware, the Clap for Carers campaign was a movement set up to basically at 8 PM on a Tuesday night during the first lockdown to go out and give a 3-minute round of applause to the NHS staff and workers and care home workers who had been involved in helping the national effort to reduce the pandemic. Boris publicly joined in with this. He also publicly commanded Tom Moore, Captain Tom Moore, who was a 100-year-old man who walked during a global pandemic in order to raise money for the NHS. Amazing that he did that, but he shouldn't have to do that, and the Prime Minister shouldn't be on national television commanding this man for raising money for the NHS when he has all the power to give the money to the NHS. He allowed hospitals to be underfunded, understaffed, student nurses were working for free, a lot of them still are, and none of these nurses and doctors who were helping reduce the deaths in the UK, he didn't decide to give them a pay rise even at the end of 2020. But MPs, they've had a hard year. MPs got a £3,000 pay.
Hi, I just want to put a quick note in here that they actually U-turned this decision, so they didn't actually get the 3k pay rise, but the fact that they were considered for it anyway is ridiculous.
He stated that the government had ordered loads of PPE from abroad, and he insisted this, and then when it came back that he hadn't and that it had been ordered later than the date that they said they'd already ordered it, he then undersupplied hospitals with PPE, encouraged people to make their own PPE, people in hospitals, nurses and doctors, people were making and 3D printing masks to donate to hospitals in the first lockdown. And then he also said that masks hadn't been proven to be effective, which obviously now we know is definitely true. But at the time, because he was not able to give the PPE that he'd promised to everyone, he was like, well, they don't work anyway. We're not really going in order here because my notes I was just writing and just remembering things from the last year, so we're going to kind of jump around a little bit. That's fine. He's fucked up throughout the whole 12 months, so we might as well just get a bit of variety, you know? He released the UK from a national lockdown into a confusing tiered system that changed throughout the year. So we started off in a national lockdown from March 23rd. This ended in middle of June with full hospitality and everything being open from 4th of July. I work in hospitality, that's an important note, so just so you know. The tiered systems changed a lot. Originally we had 5 tiers, they look like the Nando scale, and it was 1 to 5. 1 was not present in the UK, and 5 was we're at risk of the NHS being overwhelmed, so we're going to show everything, which is the lockdown that we had originally in March. Then they changed this tiered system from a 5-tier system down to a 3-tiered system, where we completely scrapped it not being in the UK. We completely scrapped it being low transmission in about September, October time, where we had the medium, high and very high tiers. Tier 3 being where all hospitality shut, shops shut, but we had in November, everyone was put into these 3 tiers. It was unclear how this was being like calculated. Majority of the country was put into tier 3, and then they were all put into tier 3 apart from like 2 places that were in tier 1, I think it was Cornwall and Isle of Wight. And then they added a 4th tier to this 3-tier system that was like 3, 4 and 5 of the first 5-tier system. They added a 4th tier to London so people couldn't spend Christmas, but then lockdown. Confusing. He introduced new lockdown restrictions on 9 PM, effective at 12 AM, so the following night. About 3 hours later it was effective, on the day before Eid. And this was given particular attention in the media of no religious places should be open during this new lockdown restrictions that we're announcing 3 hours before Eid starts. And this was announced via Twitter, not a public briefing, not one of the briefing where he sits there holding his thumbs. This was via Twitter, people found out about this. I was sat in a pub with some of my friends when we were still allowed, God bless, and got this notification that the bar that I was sat in was going to be shut in 3 hours because national lockdown was happening. But it wasn't a full lockdown, it was really odd, but then they made such an effort, which I've talked about a bit later on, they made such an effort to try and get Christmas to happen, despite numbers being significantly higher, and our number being so much higher in December than it was back in when Eid was, July. And yet they still decided to close at 9 PM, from 9 PM to 12 PM. They gave a 3-hour window for people to cancel all their Eid plans. And just, anyone who says racism doesn't exist in the UK is fucking blind. The next, oh, this gets me riled up, bearing in mind I work in a bar. They encouraged Eat Out to Help Out, which was a system devised by Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, basically to try and stimulate hospitality, where during Monday to Wednesday you got half price meals at selected restaurants, but majority of restaurants and bars kind of entertained this. At this time, back in August, you, as a worker, I had to wear a mask at a bar. I'm fine with that, that's absolutely fine. But customers were not required to wear a mask in a bar, as it was deemed that bars were safe enough that you didn't need to wear a mask indoors where you're eating and drinking and I have to touch your saliva to wash your glasses and wash your plates. But, you know, it only took them 3 months to realise that people should wear masks in bars. This Eat Out to Help Out system, not only did it fully stress out thousands, millions of workers who worked in hospitality, I can tell you from my experience and everyone I work with experience and everyone I know that works in hospitality, that that month was one of the worst months of their lives because of the amount of stress, the amount of rude customers who didn't understand that the pandemic was still happening, people peering around the glass protection for us and not having to wear a mask and still using cash, fun stuff like that. As mentioned, they put many places into tier 3 and with this new tier system, and this started with a lot of northern cities originally. So like London was still in tier 2, even though their numbers were the same as some of the ones up north that were put into tier 3. I talked about this in a video before. Boris Johnson refused to negotiate with Andy Burnham to try and get the 80% for workers who are affected by tier 3. This was prior to us being put into tier 3, so we knew we were going into it, but Andy Burnham was fighting, trying to get, if hospitality closes, workers should get 80%, which, why would they not? Why, when we've spent, what, 8 months at this point, giving people 80% of their wages when it's a national lockdown, but when it's like, well, we're not shutting everything, so we'll just give you 66%? Sorry, how does that make sense? And Andy Burnham, I've said this in my video, I'll link it up here. Andy Burnham went down from his original ask of like 60 million or something down to like 10 million, and they still refused to do it. And then they put London into tier 3 like a week later and then gave everyone 80%. Then they will, because it affects them and it affects the people who work and stimulate the economy. Back in November, Keir Starmer, the leader of the opposition party, the leader of the Labour Party, criticised Boris for not putting us into a national lockdown. Boris laughed, said Keir Starmer was being ridiculous and that it was not something that they were considering, then introduced a national lockdown for 4 weeks, not long after that. Throughout last year, everything that Boris and his administration, and I don't want to just say Boris, but it is his administration, so Matt Hancock, Rishi Sunak, Priti, Patel, all of them lovely people. Boris's administration were constantly just giving suggestions. They'd be like, we advise you not to leave the house. We advise you to stay at home. I'm not actually getting people to legally stay at home. It wasn't until the national lockdown that they legally were like stopping people on the streets and asking where they were going and stuff like that. And they say they're doing that now, but I haven't seen a single. I haven't been asked if I've been exercising or running my key worker brother to work or stuff like that. I've never been asked. Then he made some of the rules legally binding. So he said, you must wear a mask in supermarkets. You must wear a mask on public transport or you will face a £100 fine. And this was pretty fair. And then they said this back in like May, June. In July, get the Metrolink, which is a tram service in Manchester. I get it from where I live into the city centre, and I was getting it 3 times a week. Twice a day, 3 times a week, back and to from work. And not once did I see somebody get a £100 fine. And that was over an 8-week period. I obviously wore a mask because I care about saving other people's lives. I understand about a national mask mandate, but I didn't see a single fine given out. I saw Metrolink workers walking around without masks on. I saw people holding them in their hands, sat on the Met, waiting for someone to come and criticise them, which they never did, so they just sat there on the Met with no mask on. I saw people wearing them like this, people wearing them like this, and it's just like, first off, if you're gonna wear them like this or like this, you might as well just put it over your nose. You might, if you've gone to the effort to buy a mask and wear a mask, why should you not just wear the mask? They only announced this week that they are going to start handing out penalties for people who don't wear masks in shops, you know, 10 months into a global pandemic. Nice one. Next one, I'm going to be nice to London for a minute. They announced Christmas being cancelled for London with immediate effect from midnight, they said. So from midnight you were not allowed to travel, you were not allowed to whatever, put them in tier 4 restrictions. And then were surprised when people tried to leave London to go home because you told them that they couldn't have Christmas. Now, I don't agree necessarily with the people leaving London on these trains and doing big, like, lack of social distancing and stuff like that, but when you have offered students, for example, I'm a university student, when you've offered them, said they have to come home during this specific week, and it was 2 weeks before Christmas, it was the 3rd to the 9th, and you told them that they had to come back at that point. You gave them COVID tests. One thing that Boris has done for students, gave them COVID tests, and they had to have 2 COVID tests before they could go home. you gave them a week. You gave them, and my uni and a lot of other unis did like specific days for specific degrees. You go on home on certain days to kind of stagger people going home, to not overwhelm public transport and motorways and shite. But you didn't think that people in London would want to go home for Christmas?
Mr. Speaker, I wish he'd have the guts just to say what he really wants to do, which is to cancel the plans people have made and cancel Christmas. I think that's what he's driving at, Mr. Speaker. He's looking a bit blank. I think that's what he's driving at. But I can tell him that as of today, and just this morning, there is actually, as I say, unanimous agreement across.
The one main thing, they all annoy me, everything on this list has annoyed me in the last 12 months. Everything at some point has led me to cry or just want to shout or rant on my Instagram stories about this administration. But this one gets me every night and it really bugs me. So bear in mind, we have the highest death toll in Europe. We have the second highest death toll per population in the world. That's not good. And every night on the briefing, which it's only Boris like once a week or something, twice a week maybe, every night it's like, well, we're the leading country in Europe for vaccines, and everything's a brag, everything. We're still feeling the effects of the first lockdown being too late and taken out too early, and they go on every night about how great they are. And I've never felt less patriotic. Not only that, they refuse to acknowledge when they mess up. Rishi Sunak, when Eat Out to Help Out obviously caused a second wave in coronavirus, he still would not rule out a winter Eat Out to Help Out and said that it helped stimulate the economy and that was his goal, and that it didn't cause a rise in coronavirus. That was, they can't admit fault. Even so, and I do not like Piers Morgan. For the life of me, he really annoys me. But he asks questions. I'll give him that. And on Good Morning Britain, a couple of weeks ago, maybe a week ago, Matt Hancock refused to say that he regretted voting against free school meals for children, which I'll get onto. But Piers Morgan was like, so do you regret it? And he was like, well, I think it's a great thing. And it's like, just admit you're wrong. Just admit you're at fault. We would respect you so much more if you just like, I'm sorry guys, we're dealing with uncharted territory. I thought this would work, it didn't. Let's try something different. Instead they're like, well, it has its merit.
Why did you, as Health Secretary, vote against this?
Well, because the reason that I'm glad now is because we've been able to sort that out and put it in place.
Well, the reason you're glad now is that you got shamed.
No, thanks to you.
Let's be honest, you got shamed into it by a football player, a young football player with a conscience, who managed to prick the conscience of you and the government. Do you regret now, given how glad you are that it's now happening, do you regret voting against it?
Well, of course, I'm pleased that we're making sure that.
That wasn't the question. I just asked if you regretted. But hang on, it's a very important question because you wouldn't have done it without Marcus Rashford campaigning. My question for you is, given how glad you now are that it's happening, do you regret voting against it? Is it yes or no?
Well, as I say, I'm really glad that it's happening.
But do you regret it? Do you regret voting against it?
Well, I'll put it this way. In the first lockdown, we took this action. And now, as you say, we're in
Health Secretary, you only have to say yes or no, whether you regret it. You either regret it or you don't.
Well, I'm really glad that the situation's been resolved.
So you regret voting against it?
I'm really glad it's been resolved and we've sorted it out. I'm going to use my own words to describe my own feelings on this one.
So you won't answer the question?
Well, it's that I'm answering the question, and I'm really glad that we've sorted.
Well, let's just hope going forward we don't rely. Let's just hope we don't have to rely.
Back in lockdown, Dominic Cummings, who is an advisor to the government, I didn't really know who he was until this happened, and I'm a politics student. Like, I was a politics student, and I study a lot of politics in uni. I did not know who this man was, basically. And when it came out that not only did Dominic Cummings travel 260 miles from London to Durham. London's at the bottom of the country, Durham is at near the top of England. So 260 miles, that's far to travel. When he had COVID, and his excuse was, one, to test his eyesight. Sorry, don't drive if you're testing your eyesight. He went to a castle, he went to Bernard Castle? Something like that. And so a public place. He didn't travel from one house to another, although he did do that. He also travelled to a public place with COVID, and they defended him, the whole government. They were like, he has not committed anything, any broke any rules here, because the rules weren't officially there really for people who had COVID. The whole self-isolation rules, they weren't really there. So Dominic Cummings didn't break any rules, and they refused to condemn his behaviour, and then handing out fines now for people going on walks. Throughout the lockdown, there has been different ways that we've recorded and reported data in terms of deaths, R number, and cases. At first, we were recording only hospital deaths on the day that they happened. Then we were recording deaths including care homes, so we were given 2 different numbers every day. Then we were told we were given death numbers for people who had COVID after 28 days of getting COVID. Then we had a case by case. We'd be told how many tests were done every day, how many of those were positive. Now we're only told how many were positive, which doesn't help perspective. If we can look back and be like, well, we had back in March this many, maybe 4,000 tested positive on this day out of 6,000 that got tested. That's a completely false number. But now we're getting told every day 50,000, 60,000 tested positive for coronavirus, but we don't know how many tests are being done. So we don't know what percentage of the population has COVID. We don't know how deaths now compare to deaths back then, because we've changed the way they're reported. They still haven't sorted the not recording on weekends. As if, imagine if we were in a war and we just didn't talk about it on the weekends, took a day off, you know. Like, so every week we're shown these charts that show how the death numbers are increasing, and every weekend there's a dip, because every day it'll be like, okay, 1,700 people died today. Oh, that's awful. 5 days later, it'll be like 50 something. And you're like, what? And it's because it's the weekend and they don't record them properly. Why not? Why not? We're in a national crisis. We're in a global pandemic where everything everyone's talking about is COVID. And we're not going to record the numbers every day? That seems a bit silly. And then you get heightened numbers after the weekend because they didn't count them for those days. It just makes no sense really. But every way they frame kind of the numbers, since like changing, they'll do a 7-day rolling average now compared to like back when they were doing like the daily height, to look like we're making progress when we're not, because they've included the weekend in an average where back then we didn't. And it just feels so like, let's show that we're doing well. Let's not give people actually the information they need, because if we were actually given the information we need, maybe people would be a bit more careful and actually follow the rules. Instead, we're going to give people really manipulated numbers, so they're a bit overwhelmed that they think we're making progress because the chart goes down or the chart goes up. It's ridiculous and I'm sick of it. And you know, everyone was baking banana bread, people were painting, people were clapping for the NHS carers, and Boris sent loads of patients back to care homes who didn't have PPE and just let them spread COVID, and then was surprised when loads of people died in care homes. And he never really faced any consequences for that. We never really talked about it. At the time it was like, why has he done that? And then I don't remember him ever apologising. Similar to the changing numbers, how they're recorded, how they're reported, we also had this weird time right at the start where they'd exaggerate testing numbers to reach goals. So they were like, we're going to do 200,000 tests a week. Great. And then they'd be like, in May I think it was, they were like, oh, we met our goal. We did 200,000 tests a week. And then it came out that actually they were recording how many they'd sent out, not how many they'd done, so like how many they'd sent to hospitals and sent to testing sites. And it's like, that's not how it works. And it's like, I get that you want to appear as a strong government, strong and stable, but lying to people for 12 months isn't the way to go about it. because now I don't trust the government. Well, I didn't really to start with, but a lot more people are losing faith in this government who are meant to be saving lives because of how many fuck-ups they've done. Oh, back in earlier this month when, you know, we just had Christmas and we let people mix with other households for 5 days and then changed it to 1 day. Why you did that anyway, don't understand why you let people mix at all. Then you were like, okay, January, let's go. Let's send the students back to schools, primary schools and high schools. We'll send them all testing, they can do mass testing, they can do all this, we'll send them all the PPE. Give teachers like a week to prepare all their lessons and everything and all their resources. Send the students in for 1 day. Say 2 days earlier, you're not going to close the schools. You literally said in the House of Commons, we're not going to close the schools, which was stupid anyway. In November they should have closed, and then you let them open for 1 day and then you close them with no notice. Well, I never apologized for it. He never apologized for it, and he said that that 1 day was crucial to their learning. Was it balls? Those teachers, first off, would be so stressed. You gave no notice to teachers, no notice to head teachers, to cleaning staff who go to the schools, all of the people involved in schools. But not only that, you gave no notice to parents who suddenly needed to find childcare if they worked, or needed to suddenly give notice to their office that they needed to work from home the next day because their kid is here and the government won't let them go to school because they don't count as a key worker. We had earlier this month with the vaccine, constantly suggested, okay, so we're going to give them the first, both the Pfizer and the Oxford, we're going to give them the first dose of the vaccine, and they need to have the second installment within 3 weeks. And it's like, okay, everyone's like, cool, that'd be great, get people vaccinated. Then the thing is, if they just said initially, we're hoping to get people to have the second dose within 3 weeks, but that doesn't look realistic. If they'd done that, people would be less annoyed. Instead, they said, you need, or this will not be effective, to have your second dose within 3 weeks, or you will not be protected. But we're going to extend it to 12 weeks. Like, what? Here's where I love to rant, and I nearly made a video about this a couple of weeks ago because I was just watching the new lockdown back in the start of Jan. I was watching these new lockdown measures and uni students to get mentioned once. Now I know I'm biased as a uni student. I am in second year. My first year was cut short by COVID. At the end, in March, we were told lockdown was happening. You might want to go home. My uni refunded all of our accommodation fees. Great, still paid full £9,250 tuition, but you know, I got most of the year, you know. We had all this online learning and online exams and fine, whatever. We got a no disadvantage policy. Great. And this is a bit of a rant about my uni as well because I'm still annoyed at them. Second year comes around. I have not stepped foot on my uni campus and it's January. And I get we're in a global pandemic, I understand that. And I would prefer online teaching in the sake of sensibility and safeness to prevent the spread of COVID. You tell everyone that unis need to stay open, unis have to stay open. When you're like, schools are staying open, unis are staying open. Great. We didn't have any lectures, but fine. Then you lock down the country, you say schools are going to close after being open for 1 day. No mention of unis. Not a single bit. We got blamed after Eat Out to Help Out for taking up what the government asked us to do. The government was like, go to bars and support restaurants. And we're like, okay, did that. And then we're like, why did you do that? That was fun. Then we got told absolutely no freshers, absolutely nothing of a social life for first years. Well, for anyone, but first years it affected most because they didn't have freshers week. Understand, clubs are shut, you know, I get it. You announced the national lockdown in January and you didn't talk about uni students. Is that because you don't want to give us our full pay back? Is that because I'm paying £9,250 a year for 2 contact hours a week? Barely any communication from my uni. Also no rent reduction. I have paid full rent for my house. I live in private accommodation. I've paid all of my rent up till now. I have lived there I lived there for 3 months. I'm probably not going to live there for the next 2 months, 3 months maybe, because I'm home, because they announced a national lockdown whilst everyone was still home for Christmas, so uni students couldn't go back, but then didn't give people money back. Thanks, Boris. When they funneled like billions of pounds into the test and trace app that doesn't work, like it's rubbish. Like I got when the pubs and stuff were open and it made sense for people to scan in where they were. I did not get a single notification ever that I'd scanned in somewhere that someone had tested positive. I had COVID back in October, and the test and trace service in terms of the phone calls, very insistent, called me a lot, like check I was okay, stuff like that. Very nice people. Bit too much calling. I didn't need to be called 14 times in one day, but you know, we move. But it was nice to be supported. The app didn't tell anyone I'd been in contact with, any of the places I went, and my work, any of that. I did that through a phone call to test and trace. So why did we put so much money into the test and trace app that the only use I've got out of it so far is telling me how many days I had left to self-isolate? My brother had COVID last week and he lives there, and I didn't get told by my app that someone in my household has COVID. I took him to his test. I didn't get told by the app. I got an email. I didn't even get a phone call saying I'd been identified as the contact. I got identified as a contact because my brother told them, not because of the fact that he lives in the room next to me. Why is billions being put into that, but you won't give 10 million to Manchester when they need it? We had the changing slogans. We had it from, I'm gonna have to read it because I don't actually remember. Stay at home, protect the NHS, save lives. Clear message, really clear message. Stay at home. If you stay at home, you protect the NHS. If you protect the NHS, you save lives. So clear. Great. Then as things were opening, they changed the message to stay alert, control the virus, save lives, which is just confusing. National governments such as Scotland and Northern Ireland, I think Wales, maybe not, didn't use this message. They stick to the save lives one, the original one. But stay alert. How am I going to stay alert of COVID? I can't see it. How am I going to control the virus? I can't see it. What? And I get that they changed that because they didn't want people to stay at home. They wanted people to go back into the economy and spend money. This is the biggest issue I think that this government's made. And in the last year, bear in mind, we have been doing this for a year, okay? We had constant assurance from the government being like, we're starting airport testing of people who enter the country. We're quarantining people for 2 weeks before they can mix with society. And they said this, and they were like, we're encouraging so much in airports, we're giving them so many resources to make sure that the people coming into our country aren't helping further the spread. Then you got news reporters being in airports and people coming back because they've been told to come back from wherever they lived, if they were UK citizens or EU citizens. All these people like, I didn't get tested. I didn't even have to wear a mask. Like I did, but I didn't have to. I didn't have to quarantine. And then this week, last week, they're like, we're gonna start closing the borders for people. That was like, great, cool. And then they were like, and so the people that are still coming into the country have to have a positive test. And it's like, we are nearly 12 months into this pandemic and you're just testing people? Just making sure they're not positive before they come to the country? But you're closing the borders, but people can still come into the country. Eh? What? Oh, it's annoyed me so much because it's like, why say you're doing something throughout that you're not? Leaving shops and retail to stay open over the Christmas period, despite high numbers of deaths, high numbers of cases, and a high R number, because we care about the economy. Do you know what I'd rather than my economy do well and I have to spend a bit more when I go on holiday to get my euros or get my dollar, I'd like my family to be healthy and alive and stuff, you know? It's so annoying because everything they do is like, let's do things based on common sense and then do things that make no sense. So, free school meals is a great service, necessary service for children who maybe that is their one meal a day because parents can't afford to give food to the family because of whatever reason, just general poverty, 80% of wages, being laid off, being terminated, being furloughed and getting 66%, stuff like that. Understandable people are in poverty, and generally before the pandemic, understandable that people are in poverty, and we should try and reduce that. So first off, Tories all voting against free school meals for children. That was bad. Why would you think, yeah, I don't really feel like feeding children? The Labour Party and many other people online were calling for free school meals to be extended over school holidays because, you know, financial hardship. And they said no. All the Tories voted against it. It took Marcus Rashford, who, what a man, who is a footballer for Manchester United. He shouldn't have to be doing this. That's the thing. Everything that's happening, and we're like, well done Captain Tom Moore, well done the NHS for dealing with these bad conditions, well done Marcus Rashford, and it's like, as much as yes, well done to those people, you did a great job, you shouldn't have to. The government should be there to give free school meals to children, to make sure that the NHS is getting the funding and the PPE that they need, to give the money to the NHS so bloody 100-year-old man doesn't have to raise it for them. So twice they voted against school meals over holidays, for Marcus Rashford to be like, maybe don't do that. Getting loads of local communities to give meals and do meal plans for people and tweeting them out constantly and being like, look at these different places where you live that you can get free school meals from. Not school meals, but free meals from, that will give you meals and give you packed lunches for kids if you're struggling to feed them. Or yourself. Then, Boris did another lovely U-turn. What is it, 16 we're on now? Did a U-turn and was like, okay, we're going to give free school meals to children. Cool. Then blamed Keir Starmer. Didn't say it was his own fault. He didn't say, I'm sorry, I messed up, we should have been giving free school meals to children, here I'm going to do that. He didn't say that. He criticised the leader of the Labour Party, the leader of the opposition, which I kind of agree with, but also, what? Why would you not admit fault? Why would you blame it on someone else that you've not admitted fault? Okay. For not successfully scrutinising the government and making sure that the free school meals happened, and that Marcus Rashford was doing this when he shouldn't have to, when it's the leader of the Labour Party's job, the leader of the opposition, to make sure that the Tories do it. But the Tories could have just done it. You didn't need Marcus Rashford to tell the Labour Party to tell you. You didn't need Marcus Rashford to tell you. You should have just done it.
Anybody in this house is happy with the disgraceful images that we've seen of the food parcels that have been offered. They are appalling. They're an insult to the families that have received them, and I'm grateful, by the way, to Marcus Rashford, who highlighted the issue and is doing quite an effective job by comparison with the right honourable gentleman in holding the government to account for these issues. And the company in question has...
One more thing I've thought of, and I'm just going to throw this in there because it's not a national thing. I'm sure a lot of people have been affected by it. We've had all the issues with universal credit, people getting their universal credit scrapped, put lower, stuff like that. My mother is self-employed, she works for a charity, she works for a football charity that I also coach for. So, history about me. I am 20 years old, my brother is 18 years old, my sister is 24 years old. So we are all over the 18-year-old adult threshold. So my father died when I was 7. So in 2008, my father died, and my mum gets like benefits. It's called bereaved parents allowance, I think, and it means that she just gets a bit of extra money to help make up for the fact that my father died and can't provide for us. But during this pandemic, and I promise it's irrelevant, because my mum used to get bereaved parents allowance, which isn't very much, I'll tell you that now, it isn't very much, because she got that amount, used to, because my brother turned 18 in August, she doesn't qualify for the self-employed help. Okay, one doesn't make sense because she doesn't get it anymore because my brother's 18, but also, if my dad was alive, if my father was here providing for me, she would have got it. She would have got the help for being self-employed, but because my father's dead, she's not allowed it. Make it make sense, Rishi Sunak, Boris Johnson. Blame it on Matt Hancock too, because I don't like you. What? How is that fair for families? Thank you for watching. I hope this made you realise how Boris has not done everything he could to minimise suffering throughout this pandemic. I will leave a couple of petitions down below to try and alter some of the things that Boris has done in the last year, and let me know your thoughts. Let me know if there's anything I forgot that Boris has done in the last 12 months that shows he is incapable of doing this pandemic. Prick. Was an 80-year-old man, 90-year-old man? About 1920. He's 100. Is he actually 100? He's 100 years old. I thought he was 80. Good on him. I need to get Trump then. But, oh.